Egghead is going to explode, literally, because the One Piece manga just revealed that we are in an all-out battle which includes a buster call that could destroy the entire islands. However, one of the most powerful fighters is still leaving us with a ton of questions because after many fans thought that Kizaru might join the Straw Hat side, he once again has proven that he hasn't broken out of the world government's chains quite yet. In fact, he straight up blasted Franky with a devastating lightspeed kick. However, we were still left with even more hints here that Kizaru could soon be turning against the evil government, because towards the end of this chapter, Dr. Vegapunk absolutely unloaded on Kizaru by calling the Admiral a sad, sad man for turning against his own friends. However, Vegapunk also seems to have hope that Kizaru's obedience to the world government might be fading, since he says that Kizaru's heart won't be able to stand attacking his friends any longer. Which, if you believe in the power of words here, might mean that Kizaru is really close to turning sides. And while I think that this by itself would already be a ton of evidence, we got even more of this as we see the Lightman himself shedding tears and even saying that he should have brought some darker sunglasses. And this line is super important and could reveal a major shock, which we'll discuss in just a moment. But at this point, Kizaru has gone all out against the crew so hard that it might be kind of hard to imagining him joining as an ally at this point. I mean, sure, we do know that Franky fought Luffy before joining the crew, and Usopp challenged Luffy to a duel, and there was the entire Sanji thing, but both of these were nothing on the scale where any Straw Hat lives were actually in danger. So does that mean that you have to count me out of the Kizaru for Nakama group? Not necessarily, but even then, that doesn't mean that he can't help the crew in this particular situation anyways. But since he has obeyed orders for such a long time, even though he doesn't really want to, there just has to be some sort of massive breaking point that crushes his desires to serve the government. And now, what could that possibly be? Well, we've already seen one slave breaking out of his chains, with Kuma breaking free from Saint Saturn's control, so maybe some sort of emotional conversation between Kuma and Kizaru, for example, could do the trick here. Or to circle it all the way back to Luffy, we have to remember that Luffy is literally called the Sun God. In other words, he is a light who frees people and slaves from their darkness, and we can clearly see that Kizaru is a slave to the government at this point, so what better way to help Kizaru to be free than for the Sun God himself to break his chains with some big emotional moments. For example, I could see something like Luffy smacking down Saturn before he can kill Bonnie or Vegapunk, or the captain saving the crew from certain death, convincing Kizaru to join their side. And honestly, whatever that turning point may play out to be, it really isn't that hard to imagine what Kizaru could do to actually help Luffy and his allies. Just as a super easy example, Kizaru could just hold off Saturn while Luffy, Bonnie, Kuma, Vegapunk, and everyone else escape. Or another really interesting option is that he could do exactly what Kuma did back on Sabaody by carrying all of them to safety with his lightspeed abilities. Remember, we already saw some light clones in chapter 1093, so maybe these clones could each carry one of the Straw Hats? I mean, it's certainly possible, but there's also one other option that I absolutely Did I just say absolutely? I mean, that I absolutely have not heard anyone else discuss so far. Because picture this mind-blowing scenario. The battle is almost at its end. Cannonballs are flying everywhere across the island, and like he always does, Luffy has just delivered the final massive punch to defeat Saturn. Then what happens next here? Well, if it's like most arcs, then the Straw Hats will be completely exhausted from battle. Like, seriously, after most major fights, they are barely even able to move. And so what better time than this for the final mysterious player in the Egghead Island saga to finally make an appearance? Because in case you have forgotten, someone from the Blackbeard Pirates has shown up on the island a while ago, and we haven't seen anything suspiciously enough from them since that has happened. In other words, what is the perfect time for Blackbeard to make his move to, I don't know, get Luffy's mythical zone fruit? Well, if this is anything like Marineford, it will be when everyone else is already wiped out from fighting each other during the battle. And so just imagine the crew is lying on the ground and then Blackbeard shows up to finish them off, steal their poneglyph copies, or take their devil fruit powers. And honestly, if that were to happen, I don't really see how the Straw Hats would survive here. But that just makes it the perfect chance for Kizaru to rush in and save all of them by fighting off Blackbeard. Seriously, can you picture it? Blackbeard's darkness versus Kizaru's light? It would be the perfect clash, even better than when Blackbeard fought Ace, let's be real. And hey, I mean, even if we say that this didn't happen, Kizaru may be holding back his strongest attack yet. Because remember that line about needing to bring darker sunglasses? Well, what if this is not only about him showing tears, what if this is also a hint that he's about to unleash his true light devil fruit awakening? And if he did, then wow, that would certainly be a blinding display, literally, because from what we know of Logia fruit awakenings, Kizaru should be able to transform the environment itself into light. And man, I would just absolutely lose my mind if we saw something like that in the next few chapters. And also, we've never have gotten a Logia awakening before, so what better time than now? However, at this point, we kind of also need to ask the question if even such an insane power as a Logia fruit awakening would even be strong enough to take down Saint Saturn. Because from what we've seen before, but especially in this chapter, he looks close to invincible. Like seriously, what is going on with this guy's powers? Because after taking a massive punch that literally broke his face, plus being crushed by entire buildings, Saturn simply got up, regrew everything that he lost, like his leg and everything, and went back to threatening the crew as if nothing had happened. And then on top of that, he got blasted with a laser from Frankie and just shrugged it off, you know, like it was nothing. Nothing happened. Like, can you even kill this guy? Well, the answer to this just has to be yeah. Right? I mean, let's hope so. And I actually have a few ideas to explain what we might be seeing with Saturn's powers here. For one, it does seem like these dark flames always appear when he needs some serious healing, which actually made me remember when he first arrived on the island. Remember this? Well, what if the magic circle here is still there on the ground and it might actually be fueling his powers somehow? I mean, as far as I know, we haven't really seen if the circle is still there or not, so it could be that someone needs to break the circle in order to cut off Saturn's invincibility. And if that's not it though, I do have some other ideas that might just blow your mind as well. First, it could be that Saturn can basically always heal unless one of his vital organs is seriously damaged. You know, the classics. I'm thinking like his heart, his brain, something like that. So it might really take a massive blow to one of those very crucial body parts to keep Saturn from actually healing himself. Or another idea that ties back into the idea of the immortality surgery is that Saturn has a limited amount of healing that he can use, and once he kind of runs out of that, he can't heal anymore. In case you don't remember, the immortality surgery, also called the perpetual youth surgery, is the ultimate technique of Law's Ope Ope no Mi, where the user gives up their entire lifespan to give another person either an extended life or even immortality. Now, we don't know exactly how that works or if the person who received that surgery is actually immortal forever. Could just be that they get a fixed amount of extra lifespan, or they could be immortal technically but still be killable. But this healing could be somehow connected to such a power, since it has been speculated that all of the Gorosei have been living ever since the Void Century. And now, with all of that being said though, it is entirely possible that his healing isn't unlimited, and beating him down enough times will will make him killable just like everyone else who's really powerful in the One Piece world. However, those aren't the only ways to probably kill him, because we have discussed before that, for example, someone like Kuma could push Saturn out into the water and make him drown. Another idea, which would just be incredibly fitting, is that Saturn is somehow infected with the sapphire scale disease, which means that if he has the illness and is out in the sunlight, then he's going to be completely turned into stone. And honestly, I would love this idea quite a lot, since Saturn was the one who originally caused all the pain from kidnapping Ginny, giving her the disease, which was then passed down to Bonnie, and basically causing everything that we saw in the flashback. And now, fair enough, you could ask, how would Saturn even get that disease? Well, there is one option here that makes a lot of sense if you ask me, because it wouldn't be too much of a stretch, I think, to imagine that Vegapunk kept a sample of the sapphire scale virus from when he cured Bonnie just a few years ago. And so if that exists, then someone could go get it and give it to Saturn. And I mean, I can just imagine the entire fan base cheering to see Saturn get hit with the same terrible disease that Kuma gave up his entire life for to save little Bonnie. So yeah, as morally questionable as that might be, count me absolutely in the group of people that want Saturn to seriously suffer for all the pain and terror that he has caused so far. But we haven't even really discussed the biggest threat to everyone's safety yet in this chapter, because by the end, we can see that the government now wants this entire island completely wiped out. And so, of course, since the massive monster sky laser beam thing seems to still be recharging, they have ordered an old traditional and classic buster call, and all the ships waiting offshore of Egghead Island are ready to bombard it with an endless stream of powerful cannonballs. And man, I'm sure that Robin and a few other people here are having serious PTSD over what's about to happen, because this is one of the worst fates that an island can suffer. And what a true tragedy this would be, because it would basically erase all of the wonderful advanced technology that Vegapunk has created on Egghead forever. Food vending machines, light holograms, all of the medical research, it could all be wiped out like this. And that's of course not even mentioning the Punk records, which is basically like the One Piece version of the internet that could be lost forever. Though, now that I'm thinking about it, I do wonder if Punk records has some bigger role to play in the overall narrative. I mean, it does seem like such a cool thing that could help the entire world, so it can't really be lost here during this arc without really doing anything, could it? Well, I would usually like to say no way that gets destroyed, but honestly, after all the kind of unresolved plot lines that we had during the Wano arc, I do hate to say that I could see it happening with Punk records as well. But all hope is not quite lost here, because I actually do think that this Buster Call might turn out differently than all the others that we've seen in the story so far. Because remember, this is the final saga. Our heroes aren't just small-time pirates, rookies anymore. Instead, they are true powerhouses and a Yonko crew who shouldn't really let something like a Buster Call stand in their way at this point. And since this arc has finally put the Straw Hats up against some of the biggest, baddest guys of the world government, I could really see them somehow eliminating the Buster Call entirely to prove the point that they aren't going to run away from fighting the government any longer. Now, that could mean something like Luffy stopping all of the cannonballs, as he could absolutely do with Gear 5, or maybe Vegapunk's technology saves the day once again. Or hey, who knows, maybe to balance it out and mess with everyone equally, the Blackbeard Pirates might stop the Marines, or even the Straw Hat Grand Fleet could make their first appearance here. But whatever be the case, don't be surprised if this Buster Call doesn't go the way the government expects, but at the same time, you never know, and it might just go exactly as the government does expect. Who can tell? One thing though that no one did expect though was the line that Vegapunk dropped about the Buccaneers' true power, because in this chapter we learned that Kuma should be dead. Basically, the self-destruct switch that Saturn forced Vegapunk to install doesn't actually cause Kuma to explode, but it instead basically turns off all the functions. And Saturn apparently pressed that button right when the Revolutionary Army saved Kuma back at the Reverie, so right now he should just be like a statue or a machine with no power. In other words, there is no scientific reason that Kuma should still be able to move, let alone remember his daughter, fly all the way from Eurasia to Egghead Island, and then fight against Saturn specifically, which is just completely mind-boggling. But what's even more incredible here is that after seeing Kuma this way, Vegapunk hints that there is some sort of secret to the Buccaneer race that could be allowing Kuma to still function here. And let's be real, since this is just bound to play some sort of major role later in the story, let's speculate on what this secret power might be. First, since we know that the Buccaneer race has always believed in the sun god Nika, then the secret Buccaneer power is very likely related to the ancient sun god figure. And I mean, the power could be something as simple as faith or belief. And I guess it would certainly be thematically fitting that as long as a person never gives up their beliefs or wishes, they can do things that they should otherwise not be able to do, just like Luffy. In fact, we just saw another example of this idea with Bonnie's own powers, where her belief in being Nika allowed her to partially transform into what she believed in. And then, in the previous chapter, we saw that Bonnie was losing faith and then basically lost her ability to transform as well. Now, I do know that all of this most likely is a result of her devil fruit powers, but it just could be an example of how faith can actually bring great power, which just makes it all the more likely, and if we know his backstory now, makes also sense that if Kuma never lost his faith or belief in Nika, then he could be able to do extraordinary things that shouldn't otherwise be possible. But to be fair, even though I don't hate this, it's a little bit abstract, so let's discuss another even more interesting idea for what could be keeping Kuma running. And to start, let's look back at this panel from chapter 1092, because here we see this Iron Giant awakening after hearing Luffy Nika's heartbeat, which, as you all know, are also known as the Drums of Liberation. And since this giant has obvious ties back to the Void Century and the Ancient Kingdom, and it awakened when Luffy activated Gear 5, then I can believe that Luffy's Nika awakening could also somehow be keeping Kuma alive. I mean, remember, Kuma is also basically a robot at this point, and it would make sense for Vegapunk to have used similar technology to the Iron Giant when making Kuma into a cyborg as well. So what if Nika could somehow power these robotic machines as some kind of natural energy source? Eternal flame? Anyone? But this could also explain why Kuma appears to lose power after punching Saturn, because Luffy also appears to be missing from this chapter altogether. Which honestly is just super odd, since we are in the middle of a fight, and last we saw him, he was just chomping down trying to regain his power, so it's possible he's just off screen trying to eat more food somewhere. But let's be real, that's the boring option, so let's throw out a few others, including one that could change the entire outcome of this battle and the entire arc. Because I'm just gonna throw it out there, what if Luffy has been kidnapped? That's right, I said it. Luffy might have been captured by Blackbeard's crew already, which would be a major problem for the good guys here, but it doesn't actually make a lot of sense, in fact, because two of the Blackbeard pirates we thought were most likely to show up on the island were Katarina Devon, who, in case you don't remember, has the shape-shifting Ninetales Fox fruit, and Lafitte, who has hypnosis powers. And honestly, I think either one of them could have tricked Luffy and somehow captured him, so that is one reason that he could already be missing from the battle. Or hey, I mean, another option is that he somehow has realized that the Iron Giant was waking up and went to find it. And this does make a lot of sense, since these two clearly have some sort of connection, and it would honestly be hilarious to see Luffy coming back piloting or riding this Iron Giant like it was some kind of giant mech suit. But I mean, if that's not true, then he's most likely still off somewhere breaking government property, stealing food, or assaulting some poor defenseless marines, which honestly, when you think about it, Luffy and the other Straw Hats have basically been committing crimes like this and way worse for basically the entire story. Seriously, in our world, he would easily be the world's #1 wanted man, and if you want to find out the absurd number of years in prison that he deserves for all of the crimes in the story, well, you can watch the video about all of the Straw Hats committed crimes right here. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.